The stone floor was cold beneath Brother Thomas's knees. For years the rhythm of monastic life had been his solace, the chants his meditation, the labor his devotion. But lately a discord had crept into his soul, a whisper of doubt that threatened to unravel the tapestry of his faith. The weight of the scriptures felt heavier, the hymns hollower. He sought an answer in the silence of the church, but found only echoing questions. He confessed his spiritual turmoil to the abbot, his voice barely a whisper. The abbot, a man weathered by years of service, listened patiently. When Thomas finished, the abbot's gaze was both knowing and compassionate. He understood the burden of doubt, the trials of faith. After a long silence, he spoke, suggesting a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela as a path to renewal. With the abbot's blessing, Thomas prepared for the journey. He packed only what was necessary: a Bible, a loaf of bread, a water skin, and the rosary his mother had given him. The map of the Camino de Santiago, a gift from the monastery's library, promised a path not only across lands, but through his own soul. Lady Elena, now calling herself Elena, bartered for supplies in a small market town. The vibrant chaos of the marketplace was a world away from the sterile formality of court. Here, she was just another face, another pilgrim seeking passage. The stench of the crowd and the cries of the vendors were a heady, intoxicating liberation. As she left the town behind, Elena glanced back at the distant castle, its imposing silhouette a reminder of what she had left behind. A forced marriage, a life dictated by political machinations. She had traded gilded cages for open roads, uncertainty for freedom. The road to Santiago was her escape, her chance to forge her own destiny. Elena knew that the road ahead would not be easy, and that her disguise was not enough to ward off all threats. She found time to practice her swordsmanship, skills honed in secret during her youth. The forest was her training ground, and the rustling leaves her only audience. Jean-Luc traced the route to Santiago on his worn map, his beady eyes gleaming with avarice. The pilgrimage was not a spiritual journey for him, but a lucrative opportunity. Thousands of pilgrims meant thousands of needs, and Jean-Luc intended to meet them at a price. He secured extra stock sturdy boots, woolen cloaks, religious trinkets, trading with local farmers and artisans. His sharp tongue and shrewd bargaining skills were legendary, ensuring he always got the better end of the deal. Jean-Luc was nothing if not prepared. With his cart overflowing with goods, Jean-Luc set off, his donkey groaning under the weight. He cared little for the piety of his fellow travelers. He saw them only as potential customers, ripe for the picking. He smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. As Brother Thomas stepped onto the road, he looked back at the monastery, a place he had called home for over 2 decades. A pang of sadness tugged at his heart, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of anticipation. The pilgrimage was not just an escape from his doubts, but a journey toward something unknown, something perhaps greater than himself. Elena joined the flow of pilgrims, a river of humanity winding its way westward. She kept to herself, wary of revealing too much. The road was a tapestry of faces, each etched with their own story, their own hopes and fears. She wondered what secrets they carried and if her own would remain hidden. Jean-Luc urged his donkey onward, his eyes scanning the passing pilgrims. He saw hardship, need, and above all, profit. The Camino de Santiago was a wellspring of opportunity, and Jean-Luc intended to drink deep. The journey had begun. The heavy oak doors of the Benedictine monastery groaned open, releasing Brother Thomas into the cool morning air. He adjusted the weight of his meager pack, feeling the familiar rosary beads in his hand. Years he had spent within those walls, seeking solace, finding what? comfort perhaps, but not the certainty he craved. The road to Santiago was long, fraught with peril, but perhaps on that arduous path he might find the answers that eluded him within the cloistered halls. Elena stumbled along the rutted road, the coarse fabric of her disguise chafing against her skin. Never had she walked so far, nor endured such discomfort. The mud clung to her boots, the sun beat down upon her face, and the smells of the road, animal dung, unwashed bodies assaulted her senses. This was a far cry from the perfumed courts and silken gowns she was accustomed to. Freedom, she reminded herself, came at a price. Jean-Luc surveyed the throng of pilgrims with a practiced eye, a veritable sea of opportunity. Sore feet, empty stomachs, and fervent desires, all could be translated into coin. He adjusted the weight of his money pouch, the clinking sound a sweet melody to his ears. This pilgrimage was not about salvation for him, it was about profit. Brother Thomas paused before a weathered shrine, a crude carving of the Virgin Mary offering a silent blessing. He fingered his rosary, the familiar beads a comfort in the growing unease he felt. The pilgrims around him were a mixed lot, some devout, some rowdy, some driven by genuine faith, others by something else entirely. He wondered which category he belonged to. A clumsy peasant, reeking of sweat and livestock, stumbled against Elena, splattering mud across her already soiled dress. Elena bit back a sharp retort, reminding herself of her disguise. Such indignities were the price of freedom, she repeated silently, though the taste of humiliation was bitter on her tongue. 2 denarii for a loaf of bread, Jean-Luc bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. The finest grain, baked fresh this morning, sustenance for the soul and the body. He winked at a potential customer, his hand never straying far from his bulging money pouch. Drawn by the commotion, Brother Thomas approached the merchant's cart. The scene was a cacophony of bartering and banter. He watched, a silent observer, as Jean-Luc skillfully extracted coin from the pockets of the faithful. Amidst the throng, Elena spotted a familiar figure, a Benedictine monk, his face etched with a quiet sorrow. She observed him, a sudden unease settling upon her. She was a master of reading faces. This man was troubled. Jean-Luc, ever observant, noticed the woman's gaze fixed on the monk. Interesting. Everyone on this road had a story, and stories, he knew, could be valuable. Brother Thomas turned, his gaze meeting the woman's. There was something in her eyes, a spark of, what? Sadness. Recognition. The moment was fleeting, but it left him with a strange sense of unease. Elena quickly looked away, feigning interest in a loaf of bread. Had he seen through her disguise? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. This journey was proving more perilous than she had anticipated. As the first stars appeared in the inky sky, the three found themselves drawn together, an unlikely trio amidst the throng of pilgrims. Brother Thomas, Lady Elena, and Jean-Luc, the merchant. Their paths had converged, their destinies, for now, intertwined. The journey to Santiago had only just begun. The ascent began before dawn, the air biting and thin. Brother Thomas found his breath shortening with each step, the familiar chants replaced by ragged gasps. Elena, ever mindful, shared her meager rations and a comforting word with a woman weakened by the cold. The hardship was a great leveler, erasing the lines of nobility and peasantry, leaving only shared vulnerability. Jean-Luc cursed the weather. This delay meant lost profits. He considered turning back, but the thought of those potential customers spurred him onward, albeit grudgingly. Sickness had begun to take hold. A fever spread like wildfire, weakening the already vulnerable. Fear mingled with the wind and snow. Brother Thomas moved among the sick, offering prayers and whatever comfort he could. He felt a familiar unease, a questioning of the divine in the face of such suffering. Jean-Luc, ever the opportunist, drove a hard bargain for blankets and remedies. "Business is business," he muttered to himself, ignoring the accusing stares. Alina, witnessing Jean-Luc's profiteering, confronted him. Her voice, though hushed, carried the weight of unspoken authority. "Have you no compassion, merchant?" she hissed. Brother Thomas stepped between them, his voice weary. "Let us not add to the suffering with anger. We are all children of God, even in our failings." Death became a constant companion. Each morning, another soul departed, leaving behind grief and a stark reminder of their own mortality. Even Jean-Luc seemed subdued by the relentless misery. The sight of the dead pilgrim stirred a discomfort he couldn't quite name. Alina quietly offered what little she could to the grieving family, a gesture of kindness that transcended her disguise. As the sun finally broke through the clouds, Brother Thomas led a prayer for the departed, his words a small comfort in the vast wilderness. He wasn't sure if God was listening, but the act of offering solace, of bearing witness, felt like the only thing he could do. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, thicker than the dust kicked up by the pilgrims' feet. The path narrowed, flanked by dense woods, perfect cover for treachery. Alina's instincts, honed in the courts of Aquitaine, screamed of danger. The silence was too profound, the shadows too deep. She knew they were being watched. Jean-Luc, ever the pragmatist, was more concerned with gauging the wealth of his fellow travelers than with any potential threats. He saw only customers, not danger. The ambush was swift and brutal. A band of brigands, faces hidden behind crude masks, erupted from the trees, their swords glinting in the dappled sunlight. "Stand and deliver," their leader roared. Amidst the chaos, Alina acted quickly. Tossing aside her meager belongings, she huddled amongst the other pilgrims, pulling her shawl tight to conceal her features. Discovery would mean certain death, or worse. Jean-Luc, ever the opportunist, saw a chance to salvage the situation. He pushed his way to the front, his hands raised in a gesture of appeasement. "Good sirs," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Surely we can come to an arrangement." Despite his peaceful calling, Brother Thomas was no coward. He hefted his sturdy staff and charged into the fray, his monastic robes billowing behind him. Years of farm work had given him surprising strength. "We are humble pilgrims," Jean-Luc pleaded, his voice rising above the clash of steel. "We have little of value, but we are willing to offer what we have. Spare our lives and you can have our coin, our trinkets." Alina watched Jean-Luc's performance with a mixture of disgust and amusement. The man was clearly more concerned with saving his own skin than with the well-being of his fellow pilgrims. Brother Thomas fought with the ferocity of a man possessed. The doubts that plagued him seemed to vanish in the heat of battle, replaced by a primal urge to protect the innocent. The bandit leader, a scarred brute with a cruel glint in his eye, accepted Jean-Luc's offering. "Enough," he bellowed. "Take what you want and be gone." Jean-Luc winced as he relinquished the hard-earned coins, a bitter taste in his mouth. As the bandits melted back into the forest, leaving behind a scene of disarray and fear, Alina let out a shaky breath. She had survived, but the encounter served as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked on the pilgrim's trail. The air crackled with anticipation. A traveling preacher, his voice a thunderous roar, held the crowd captive. Brother Thomas found himself drawn in, the words both comforting and unsettling. The man spoke of divine judgment and the urgent need for repentance. Alina sat apart, watching the preacher with a cynical eye. She missed the comforts of court, the power she once wielded. Now, reduced to a simple pilgrim, she felt vulnerable and exposed. Jean-Luc saw opportunity. The preacher's words stirred the pilgrim's emotions, and Jean-Luc knew that fear and devotion were easily converted into sales. He laid out his wares, cheap rosaries, relics, and vials of holy water, ready to capitalize on the fervor. Later, Brother Thomas sought solace in a small chapel. The preacher's words echoed in his mind, stirring long-dormant doubts. Was his faith strong enough? Was he truly worthy of God's grace? Alina walked apart from the group, wary of drawing attention. The anonymity she craved felt increasingly fragile. She knew her past could catch up to her at any moment, shattering her fragile peace. Jean-Luc's business boomed. Pilgrims, desperate for tangible signs of their faith, eagerly purchased his wares. He chuckled to himself, counting his coins. Piety, it seemed, was a profitable commodity. Brother Thomas sought out the preacher, eager to understand the source of his conviction. They spoke for hours, debating the nature of sin, redemption, and the complexities of faith. The conversation left Thomas even more conflicted. Alina shared a simple meal with fellow pilgrims, listening to their stories. She marveled at their resilience, their unwavering faith in the face of hardship. A pang of longing resonated within her, a yearning for connection, for belonging. As night fell, Jean-Luc tallied his profits. He cared little for faith or doubt. For him, the pilgrimage was simply a business venture, a means to an end. He slept soundly, dreaming of riches. Brother Thomas walked on, the preacher's words still echoing in his mind. The simplicity of monastic life seemed distant, replaced by a confusing array of questions. The journey to Santiago felt more arduous than ever. Alina gazed at the horizon, a vast expanse of rolling hills stretching before her. The pilgrimage was a journey of physical hardship, but also a journey into the depths of her own soul. She wondered if she would ever find true peace. Jean-Luc packed his wares, eager for the next day's journey. He knew the road to Santiago was long, but so were the opportunities for profit. He smiled, his eyes glinting with avarice. The whispers of faith, the echoes of doubt, they were all just grist for his mill. Conques was renowned for its relics, especially those of Saint Foy, a young martyr. Brother Thomas found himself amidst throngs of pilgrims, all eager to venerate the jeweled reliquary. Yet, a nagging doubt persisted within him. Could these be truly authentic? The sheer opulence seemed at odds with the humble teachings of Christ. The marketplace buzzed with trade. Alina purchased a blessed candle, a common practice for pilgrims seeking divine favor, but the act felt tainted. Her disguise, necessary as it was, felt like a constant deception. Was she truly a pilgrim or merely an actress playing a part? Jean-Luc, ever the opportunist, saw Conques as a goldmine. He discreetly inquired about the relic trade, learning of the less-than-scrupulous practices some merchants employed. Fake relics, inflated prices, it was a business like any other, but with higher stakes. Thomas sought refuge in the courtyard, away from the frenzied devotion. The doubts gnawed at him. If the relics were false, what did it say about the faith of those who venerated them? Was their belief misplaced, or did the intention behind the act hold more weight? Outside the town, Alina shared a meal with other pilgrims. Their stories, filled with hardship and unwavering faith, were a stark contrast to her own privileged life. She felt a pang of guilt, knowing her true identity separated her from their genuine devotion. Jean-Luc watched wealthy pilgrims eagerly buying relics, their faces flushed with religious fervor. He saw not devotion but opportunity. The demand was high, and he knew he could capitalize on it, conscience be damned. Thomas sought out a scholar he'd met on the road, a man known for his sharp intellect and skepticism. They discussed the history of Saint Foy and the relics attributed to her, poring over ancient texts in the abbey's library. The scholar's doubts mirrored his own, offering a sense of validation, but no easy answers. In the Pilgrims' hospice, Alina helped care for a sick child. The act of service, devoid of any personal gain, brought a flicker of peace. Perhaps, she thought, true faith lay not in grand gestures but in small acts of kindness. Under the cover of darkness, Jean-Luc finalized a deal. He acquired a relic of questionable origin, a small bone fragment said to be from a minor saint. He had no qualms about its authenticity. Profit was his only concern. Before leaving Conques, Thomas knelt before the reliquary once more. He closed his eyes, focusing not on the object itself, but on the intention behind the prayers of the pilgrims around him. Perhaps faith, he realized, was not about certainty, but about the willingness to believe, even in the face of doubt. As Alina left Conques, she glanced back at the town. The experience had been unsettling, forcing her to confront the complexities of her own identity and the true meaning of her journey. The road ahead remained uncertain, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jean-Luc rode out of Conques, his purse heavier than before. He cared little for faith or doubt. His pilgrimage was proving to be quite profitable indeed. The road to Santiago was paved with opportunities, and he intended to seize them all. A hushed whisper snaked through the crowd, the words Queen Alina carried on the breeze like a dangerous secret. Alina's blood ran cold. Had she been recognized? Her carefully constructed anonymity threatened to shatter. Jean-Luc's ears perked up at the murmurings. Queen Alina, an opportunity perhaps. Where there was royalty, there was always coin to be made, one way or another. He began to weave his way through the crowd, his merchant's instincts sharp and focused. The whispers barely registered with Brother Thomas. He had sought refuge in a small chapel, the weight of his past pressing heavily on his soul. A youthful indiscretion, a broken vow, it had haunted him for years, a constant reminder of his fallibility. A familiar face emerged from the crowd. Sir Geoffrey, a knight from her court, his gaze sweeping across the pilgrims. Alina ducked behind a stall overflowing with apples, her heart pounding in her chest. Discovery meant a return to the political machinations she desperately sought to escape. Jean-Luc, ever the opportunist, saw Sir Geoffrey's fine armor and recognized him as someone of importance. He approached the knight, offering a simple courtesy, his mind already calculating the potential value of information. The face of Brother Michael, his mentor, flashed before Thomas's eyes. Their disagreement, so long ago, had led to harsh words and a rift that never healed. Michael's subsequent death weighed heavily on Thomas, a constant burden of guilt. Alina strained to hear Jean-Luc's conversation with Sir Geoffrey. She could sense the merchant fishing for information, his words carefully chosen, his intent masked behind a facade of innocent curiosity. A generous reward awaits anyone who can provide information about the Queen's unexpected absence, Jean-Luc hinted, his eyes gleaming with avarice. He knew the game, the subtle dance of secrets and coin. Thomas rose, his mind made up. He could not undo the past, but he could strive to make amends. His pilgrimage was no longer just penance, but a chance for redemption. He would seek out the abbot upon his return and confess his transgression. Alina knew she had to act. Staying hidden was no longer an option. She stepped out from behind the apple stall, her eyes fixed on Jean-Luc and Sir Geoffrey. She needed to control the situation before it spiraled out of her grasp. Jean-Luc jumped, startled by Elena's sudden appearance. He recognized the steely glint in her eyes, a look that belied her simple attire. He knew he had underestimated her. "Merchant," Elena said, her voice low but firm, "you are playing a dangerous game, one that could cost you more than just coin." The bandit attack had left Elena wounded and shaken. Brother Thomas, despite his own anxieties, tended to her wound with surprising gentleness. Elena tried to suppress a groan as Brother Thomas dabbed at the gash on her arm. The pain was a sharp reminder of the dangers she now faced, stripped of her title and protectors. Jean-Luc, ever resourceful, produced a vial of herbs and a clean bandage. "A little something I picked up from a wise woman in Tours," he explained. "Good for cuts and stings and keeping the fever at bay." With Thomas's help, Elena managed to stand. The experience had shaken her deeply, but a spark of resilience flickered in her eyes. As darkness fell, they huddled around a small fire, sharing what little food they had. The shared danger had created an unexpected camaraderie. That night, Elena spoke of her reasons for taking the pilgrimage, carefully omitting the truth of her identity, but revealing a deep yearning for freedom. Brother Thomas, in turn, confessed some of his own doubts and struggles with faith, finding unexpected solace in Elena's open honesty. Jean-Luc, ever the pragmatist, saw an opportunity to solidify their alliance. "Elena," he began, "I've traveled these roads for years. I know the safest routes, the most reliable contacts. Allow me to help you reach your destination safely." Elena hesitated. Could she trust him? Jean-Luc was a merchant, driven by profit, but she sensed a genuine desire to help beneath his pragmatic exterior. "Think of it as a business arrangement, Elena," Jean-Luc said with a wink. "You get safe passage, and I get, well, let's just say having a noblewoman under my protection might be good for business." Elena considered his offer. She had little choice. "Very well, Jean-Luc," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I accept your arrangement." The fire crackled and died, leaving them in darkness. An unlikely bond had been forged, born of shared hardship and the uncertainties of the road ahead. Their pilgrimage, whatever their initial intentions, had become inextricably intertwined. The air grew thick with anticipation. Santiago de Compostela was near. For Brother Thomas, the physical journey was nearing its end, but the internal one felt as though it had just begun. He pondered the doubts that had plagued him, realizing they were not a sign of weakness, but an invitation to a deeper, more personal faith. Elena gazed towards the horizon, the spires of Santiago almost visible in the distance. Freedom had been her initial goal, but the pilgrimage had revealed a strength within her she never knew existed. The question was no longer how to escape her fate, but how to embrace it on her own terms. A decision formed in her mind, one that would change the course of her life. Jean-Luc counted his earnings, a satisfied grunt escaping his lips. The pilgrimage had been profitable, no doubt. But as he looked around at the faces of the devout, a strange feeling settled over him. Had he only profited from their faith, or had he, in some small way, been touched by it too? The question lingered, a discomforting yet intriguing thought. Thomas's doubts hadn't vanished, but they no longer held him captive. He found solace in acts of kindness, in the shared humanity of the pilgrim trail. He realized faith wasn't about certainty, but about the courage to continue searching, to continue believing, even in the face of uncertainty. "I will return," Elena confided in Brother Thomas, her voice firm. "Not as a pawn, but as a player. I will use my position to make a difference. The pilgrimage had given her the clarity and courage to face her responsibilities, to shape her own destiny. Jean-Luc found himself distributing bread and cheese to the less fortunate pilgrims. It was a small act, but it felt significant. Perhaps, he mused, there was more to life than just accumulating wealth. Perhaps there was even charity. The city of Santiago came into view, its cathedral spires piercing the sky. Brother Thomas felt a wave of emotion, relief, gratitude, and a newfound sense of purpose. The journey had been arduous, but it had led him back to himself, to a stronger, more resilient faith. Before entering Santiago, Elena paused at a small chapel. She offered a prayer, not for salvation, but for strength and wisdom. She was ready to face her future, to embrace her destiny, armed with the lessons learned on the pilgrim trail. Jean-Luc stared at the grand cathedral, its sheer scale dwarfing him. He had seen many impressive sights in his travels, but this was different. This was a testament to something greater than himself, something he couldn't quite grasp, but felt nonetheless. Brother Thomas entered Santiago, a changed man. The pilgrimage had not erased his doubts, but it had given him the strength to live with them, to find meaning and purpose in the face of uncertainty. His journey of faith was far from over. It had only just begun. Elena stood at a crossroads, both literally and figuratively. She would soon shed her disguise and reclaim her title, but she would never forget the lessons learned as a simple pilgrim. The journey had transformed her, empowering her to face her future with courage and conviction. Jean-Luc set up his stall in the bustling marketplace of Santiago. He was still a merchant, still driven by profit, but something had shifted within him. The pilgrimage had not made him a saint, but it had opened his eyes to the world beyond his ledger book. Perhaps, just perhaps, he would conduct his business with a little more humanity. The final descent into Santiago felt less like a march and more like a gentle glide. The weight on Brother Thomas's heart, the doubt that had plagued him for so long, seemed to lighten with every step. He crested Monte do Gozo, the Mount of Joy, and there it was, Santiago. The city shimmered in the distance, a beacon of hope and the culmination of his arduous journey. Elena, walking beside Brother Thomas, felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Santiago represented the end of her disguise, the point where she would have to decide her next course of action. The city held the promise of sanctuary, but also the looming threat of discovery. Jean-Luc, ever the opportunist, surveyed the scene with a calculating eye. The throngs of pilgrims meant only one thing: opportunity. The marketplace buzzed with activity, a symphony of bartering and selling. He could already taste the profits. The Cathedral of Santiago was a monument to faith, a testament to centuries of devotion. Brother Thomas knelt before the altar, the weight of his journey finally settling upon him. He prayed not for answers, but for the strength to accept the questions that remained. Elena stood near the tomb of St. James, watching the devout pilgrims. The shared faith was palpable, a unifying force that transcended social standing. Yet she knew her own path was different. She wouldn't find solace in the relics, but in taking control of her own destiny. Jean-Luc, true to his nature, wasted no time. He secured a deal with a local craftsman for a large quantity of woolen blankets, essential for the journey back. He envisioned a new trade route, one that bypassed the established paths and cut through the heart of the Pyrenees. Risky, but the potential reward was immense. Brother Thomas found Elena in a quiet courtyard. "Will you return to your home?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. He had sensed a strength in her, a determination that belied her simple attire. "Not as Alina," she replied, her voice regaining its aristocratic timbre. "I return as a leaner, and not to be a pawn but a player." She revealed her true identity to Brother Thomas, a trust forged in shared hardship. Jean-Luc, meanwhile, spread out his maps, charting a new route through the Pyrenees. He'd hire local guides, bribe the necessary officials, and establish a faster, more efficient passage for goods. The pilgrimage was ending, but for Jean-Luc, the business was just beginning. Brother Thomas began his journey back to the monastery. He carried no relics, no souvenirs. His treasure was within, a quiet acceptance, a deeper understanding of his faith, and a newfound appreciation for the complexities of the world beyond the monastery walls. Alina, no longer Alina, rode towards her kingdom. She had found strength in anonymity, clarity in hardship. She would face the political storms ahead, armed with the wisdom gained on the Pilgrim Trail, ready to fight for her rightful place. Jean-Luc, ever the pragmatist, plunged into the rugged landscape of the Pyrenees. The journey had not transformed him, but it had enriched him. He had new routes, new contacts, and a renewed sense of purpose. The pilgrimage for him was simply good business.